Professor Zilnara stood at the front of the large classroom, her four eyes scanning the students who filled the tiered seats of the lecture hall. The blue-skinned Arcturian educator had taught xenobiology at the Galactic Academy on Xerion Prime for over 200 years. She was widely respected and somewhat feared by students from 17 different star systems. Today marked the beginning of a new academic term, and Zilnara was not in a good mood. The Academy administrators had informed her that a human would be joining her advanced class as part of the new interspecies educational exchange program. She tapped her long fingers against the smooth surface of her teaching console, her facial tentacles twitching with annoyance. Humans were still newcomers to the Galactic Alliance. Their planet Earth was in a small, unremarkable solar system, and they had only figured out faster-than-light travel 80 years ago. Most advanced species considered humans to be far behind in intelligence and scientific understanding. Their brains were not enhanced with neural implants, and they couldn't connect directly to the galactic knowledge networks. "Professor, the new students are arriving now," said her teaching assistant, a tall, thin being from Proxima Centauri. Zilnara nodded and straightened her formal teaching robes. She watched as the seats filled with a diverse collection of beings. There were the crystalline Centaurians, the robotic Syrians, the gas-filled Jovians in their containment suits, and many others. They all carried the latest quantum data tablets and had visible neural connection ports at their temples. And then she spotted him, the human. He walked in quietly and took a seat in the back row. Unlike the others, he carried only a simple tablet and what appeared to be handwritten notes on paper. Actual paper. Zilnara could hardly believe it. Even more shocking was the lack of any visible technology enhancements. No neural ports, no sensory augmentation, nothing. Once all students were seated, Zilnara activated the room's acoustic field to amplify her voice. "Welcome to Advanced Xenobiology. I am Professor Zilnara. This course is considered the most challenging in the Academy's Science Division. Many of you will fail. Those who pass will have proven themselves worthy of the highest academic recognition." She paused to let her words sink in. Several students shifted nervously in their seats. The human, however, simply looked attentive and calm. "Let us begin by assessing your current knowledge level," Zilnara continued. She displayed a complex molecular structure on the large holographic projection in the center of the room. This is a standard protein configuration found in most oxygen-breathing species. The projection changed to show the same structure, but distorted in various ways. Now, who can explain how protein synthesis is affected by variable gravity environments? The classroom remained silent. This was a difficult question, one that Zilnara usually saved for final examinations, not the first day of class. She had posed it deliberately to set the tone of the course and to remind students of its difficulty. Her eyes focused on the human in the back row. Here was a perfect opportunity to establish the natural order of things. "Human Rivera," she called out, reading the name from her student roster. "Since Earth has only recently joined our galactic community, perhaps you would benefit from attempting to answer this question. Please explain complex protein synthesis in variable gravity environments." The classroom grew tense. Everyone recognized what was happening. The professor was singling out the human, expecting him to fail publicly. It was a common teaching tactic on many worlds: establish dominance early by exposing weakness. The human named Alex Rivera stood up slowly. He was average height for his species, with brown hair and light skin. Nothing remarkable about him physically. He didn't seem nervous or embarrassed. "Thank you for the question, Professor," he said in a clear voice. "Protein synthesis in variable gravity presents several challenges, particularly regarding the folding process." Zilnara's facial tentacles twitched slightly, surprised that the human even knew where to begin. Alex continued, "In standard gravity, proteins fold according to their amino acid sequences and the surrounding molecular environment. However, in variable gravity, the folding patterns can be disrupted by changes in pressure and molecular density." He picked up his tablet and made a quick drawing with his finger, which was projected onto the main display. It showed a simple but accurate diagram of molecular bonds shifting under different gravitational forces. The key issue becomes maintaining stable folding patterns when gravity fluctuates. Several approaches have been developed to address this. The most common is to use stabilizing enzymes that create temporary scaffolding around the forming protein. As Alex spoke, Zilnara noticed something odd. Unlike the other students who would be accessing information through their neural implants, this human appeared to be recalling everything from memory. He occasionally glanced at his notes but mostly spoke from his own knowledge. But the most interesting solution, Alex continued, was developed on the Kepler 438b colony. Instead of fighting against variable gravity, they worked with it by adjusting their synthesis chambers to mimic a cyclical gravity pattern. This produced proteins that were actually more stable than those created in constant gravity environments. The technique increased viable protein chains by about 22% and reduced how quickly they broke down during storage. When he finished, the room was completely silent. Zilnara stared at the human with all four of her eyes. His answer was not just correct, it was comprehensive and included practical applications that she herself hadn't considered in her lectures. That was accurate, she admitted reluctantly. Though your explanation lacks the mathematical precision we expect at this institution. Alex nodded politely and sat down. The other students looked at him with new interest. The Arcturian professor felt a mix of surprise and irritation. This was not how she had expected the exchange to go. For the remainder of the class, Zilnara posed equally difficult questions to other students. Some answered correctly with help from their neural connections to the Academy database. Others struggled despite their technological advantages. As the students filed out at the end of the session, Professor Zilnara observed the human. He was speaking with a Syrian student, gesturing with his hands as he explained something. The Syrian's exoskeleton lights pulsed with interest. Curious, Zilnara murmured to herself. Perhaps this human warranted further testing. After all, one lucky answer did not indicate true intelligence. In her experience, unaugmented biological minds showed their limitations soon enough. She began planning more difficult questions for the next class. If this human thought today was challenging, he would soon learn what it truly meant to study at the Galactic Academy. No primitive species without neural enhancement had ever completed her course successfully. Zilnara was certain that natural order would prevail. It always did. But as she gathered her teaching materials, a small doubt crept into her mind. The human's answer about the Kepler colony's approach had included details not found in the standard Academy database. Where had he learned that? Perhaps this term would be more interesting than she had anticipated. Over the next 3 weeks, Professor Zilnara watched the human student carefully. In every class, she made sure to call on Alex Rivera with the most difficult questions she could think of. She was certain that his correct answer on the first day had been lucky guesswork or perhaps information fed to him by the Academy administrators to help him save face. Yet each time she challenged him, Alex responded with thoughtful, correct answers. Even more frustrating for the professor was the way he approached problems. Unlike the other students who processed information through their neural implants with lightning speed, Alex took his time. Sometimes he would close his eyes briefly before answering. Other times he would sketch something on his tablet first. His method seemed primitive, yet his conclusions were often insightful. On the 4th week, Zilnara decided to increase the difficulty level significantly. Today we will discuss interspecies microbial communication networks, she announced to the class. This is typically covered in the final year of study, but I believe we should address more advanced concepts. Several students looked at each other nervously. They all knew what the professor was doing. This was material far beyond the usual curriculum for this point in the term. Human Rivera, Zilnara called out, not even trying to hide her intentions anymore. Please explain how bacterial colonies from different species can establish communication, despite having no evolutionary connection. The classroom went silent. Even with neural implants and direct access to the Academy's vast knowledge database, this was a topic that required deep understanding, not just memorized facts. Alex stood up calmly. He took a moment before speaking, his eyes focused as if seeing something beyond the classroom. Interspecies microbial communication occurs in several ways, he began. The first and most basic is through chemical signals. Even bacteria that evolved on different worlds often use similar molecular structures because the laws of chemistry are universal. He picked up his tablet and began drawing as he spoke. The second method involves electrical potential across cell membranes. This creates weak but detectable fields that nearby organisms can sense. Zilnara watched as his simple drawings appeared on the main display. They were basic, yet somehow clearer than the complex models in the academy textbooks. But the most interesting method, Alex continued, is what we might call adaptive translation. When two microbial species first encounter each other, they begin by releasing random chemical signals. They then observe which signals get responses. Over generations, which for bacteria can be very quick, they develop a shared chemical language. Paused and added more to his drawing. We saw this happen on Mars when Earth bacteria were accidentally introduced to the native microbial mats in the subsurface aquifers. Within 6 months, the two populations had established a functional communication system, despite having evolved separately for billions of years. The professor's facial tentacles twitched rapidly, a sign of surprise among Arcturians. The Mars incident had only been documented in specialized Earth journals. It wasn't in the Academy's main database. "How do you know about the Mars microbial interaction?" she asked sharply. Alex looked slightly embarrassed. "I was part of the cleanup team. I was still a student back on Earth when it happened. We were supposed to prevent contamination, but after it occurred, we studied the results." A Syrian student named Vexlor raised one of his metallic appendages. "Professor, may I ask Human Rivera a question?" Zilnara nodded, curious about what would follow. Vexlor's exoskeleton lights pulsed with interest as he turned to Alex. "You have no neural implants or quantum memory storage. How do you recall this information so precisely?" It was a question many in the class had wondered about but hadn't dared to ask directly. Alex smiled. "Humans learn differently. We don't just store information. We connect it to other things we know. We call it associative memory." "But that's inefficient," said a crystalline Centaurian student, her voice ringing like small bells. "Neural storage allows perfect recall of exactly what you need." "True," Alex agreed. "But sometimes the connections between facts lead to new insights. When ideas connect in unexpected ways, we discover things we weren't even looking for." Professor Zilnara found herself fascinated despite her initial skepticism. The human was describing a cognitive process that was fundamentally different from the educational methods used throughout the Galactic Alliance for the past 3 centuries. After class, several students gathered around Alex, asking him more questions about human learning. Zilnara observed from a distance, noticing how he used his hands to gesture as he explained concepts, how he drew analogies to help others understand, and how he asked questions to gauge their comprehension. Later that evening, in her private office, Zilnara accessed the Academy's records on human education. Most of the information focused on the technical limitations of human brains, their finite memory capacity, their need for sleep to process information, their reliance on emotional context for learning. But there was little about the potential benefits of their approach. Zilnara found herself wondering if the Alliance had been too quick to dismiss human cognition as primitive simply because it wasn't technologically enhanced. The next day, Zilnara made an announcement that surprised the class. "For our next unit, we will be working in pairs. And no, you may not choose your partners." She displayed a list of paired names on the main screen. "I have matched each of you with someone whose cognitive approach differs from your own." The students murmured among themselves as they saw the pairings. The professor had placed Alex with Vexlor, the Syrian student whose mind was partially mechanical. "Your task is to solve a problem together, but you must document your thought processes, not just your conclusion. I want to understand how different minds approach the same challenge." As the students began to pair up, Zilnara approached Alex. "Human Rivera," she said, her voice quieter than usual. "I have a question that is not related to our class material." Alex looked up, surprised. "Yes, Professor?" You mentioned being on the Mars cleanup team. That was 70 Earth years ago, yet you appear quite young for your species. How is this possible? Alex smiled. Good observation, Professor. I'm actually 53 years old. I spent 27 years in cryosleep during deep space travel, before the development of faster engines. To me, the Mars incident feels like it happened just 6 years ago. Zilnara's facial tentacles relaxed slightly, a sign of relief. That explains it. For a moment I thought humans had developed some form of longevity treatment the Alliance was unaware of. No, Alex laughed. We still have our limitations, but sometimes limitations can be strengths in disguise. When you can't live for centuries, you learn to make the most of the time you have. As Zilnara walked away, she found herself considering his words. Perhaps there was more to learn about humans than she had initially thought. The paired assignment created unexpected dynamics in Professor Zilnara's classroom. Most interesting to her was the partnership between Alex Rivera and Vex Lore. The human and the Syrian could not have been more different. Vex Lore's partially mechanical mind processed information in precise, logical sequences. He could calculate complex equations instantly and recall facts with perfect accuracy. Alex, meanwhile, relied on his natural brain with its limited capacity and imperfect recall. Yet as Zilnara observed them working together, she noticed something surprising. Vexlore would provide rapid calculations and precise data, while Alex would suggest unexpected connections between seemingly unrelated concepts. Together, they solved problems faster than either could alone. Fascinating, Zilnara muttered to herself as she walked between the working pairs. They complement each other. After a week of partnered exercises, the professor decided it was time for a greater challenge. She stood at the front of the classroom and activated the main display. Today I am announcing the midterm project, she said. This will count for 30% of your final grade. The display showed images of a planet with swirling storms and dramatic landscapes. This is Nexus 9, recently discovered in the Cygnus sector. It has extreme environmental fluctuations unlike any habitable world we have encountered before. One hemisphere experiences temperatures of positive 80 degrees, while the other simultaneously drops to negative 60. These conditions alternate every 14 standard days. She paused to let the information sink in. Your task is to design a theoretical ecosystem capable of surviving on this planet. Your design must include at least 5 interdependent species and explain how they would adapt to the temperature shifts. The students began talking excitedly. This was exactly the kind of challenge that xenobiologists lived for. You will work in teams of 4, Zilnara continued. Each team will have access to the Academy's simulation chambers to test your designs. She displayed the team assignments on the screen. Alex had been placed with Vexlore and 2 other students, a Jovian named Plex and a Centaurian named Kiri, Yusiu. Have 2 weeks to complete your designs. We will then have presentation days where each team will demonstrate their ecosystem. As the teams gathered to begin planning, Professor Zilnara walked around the room listening to their initial discussions. When she reached Alex's team, she found them already deeply engaged. The temperature shift is too extreme for most carbon-based life, Kiri was saying, her crystalline form glittering as she spoke. Perhaps we should consider silicon-based organisms. Processing all simulations now, Vexlore said, his eyes glowing as he connected to the Academy's computational network. Silicon-based life would have a 32.7% higher survival probability in the cold phase, but would struggle during the heat phase. Plex, floating in his containment suit, released a puff of colored gas, a Jovian expression of thoughtfulness. What if we design completely separate ecosystems for each hemisphere? They could exist independently. That would work, Vexlore agreed, but it doesn't fully solve the problem. When the temperatures reverse, each ecosystem would still perish. Alex had been quiet, sketching something on his tablet. Now he looked up. What if we approach this differently? Instead of designing organisms that can withstand both extremes, what if we create species that can transform as the conditions change? His teammates looked at him with confusion. Explain, Kiri requested. Alex turned his tablet so they could see his drawing. On Earth, we have animals called tardigrades that can enter a state called cryptobiosis when conditions become too harsh. They essentially dehydrate themselves and shut down all metabolic processes until conditions improve. Vexlor's lights pulsed rapidly. You are suggesting organisms that can enter suspended animation for 14 days. Similar, but more active, Alex said. What if our primary species has two distinct life phases? During the cold phase, it exists, in one form with certain adaptations. When the hot phase approaches, it enters a chrysalis state and emerges as a heat-adapted form. Like Earth butterflies? Plex asked, surprising everyone with his knowledge of Earth biology. Alex nodded. Yes, but triggered by temperature rather than maturation, and the cycle would repeat throughout the organism's life. Kiri's crystalline structure vibrated with excitement. And each form could fill different ecological niches. The cold form could focus on gathering nutrients while the heat form could focus on reproduction. Exactly, Alex agreed. We'd need to design the transformation process carefully, but it could work. Vexlor was already running calculations. This approach has not been tested in the simulations before. It would require significant genetic programming. But is it possible? Alex asked. After a moment, Vexlor nodded. Yes, difficult, but possible. Professor Zilnara had been listening. Silently, now she stepped forward. An interesting approach, Human Rivera. But how would you maintain ecosystem continuity during the transformation periods? Not all organisms would transform at exactly the same time. Alex considered the question. We would need buffer species, organisms that can survive in the intermediate temperatures during the transition periods. They would provide ecological stability while the main species transform. Zilnara was impressed but didn't show it. Work out the details carefully. A concept is only as good as its implementation. As she walked away, she heard the team continuing to develop Alex's idea with growing enthusiasm. Over the next 2 weeks, Professor Zilnara observed the teams working on their projects. Most groups took conventional approaches, designing hardy organisms with thick protective layers or underground dwelling habits to escape the temperature extremes. They worked primarily in the simulation chambers, running test after test of different genetic combinations. Alex's team split their time differently. They used the simulation chambers, but they also spent hours in the Academy's biological archives, studying adaptation mechanisms from worlds across the galaxy. Zilnara noticed that Alex often led them to examine species that other teams overlooked, creatures that used unusual strategies to survive in extreme environments. On the day before presentations were due, Zilnara found Alex alone in the study hall late in the evening. He was making hand-drawn sketches rather than using the Academy's advanced design programs. "Still working, Human Rivera?" she asked. Alex looked up, surprised by her presence. "Yes, Professor. Just finalizing some details." "May I see?" she asked, genuinely curious about his process. He showed her his drawings, detailed sketches of organisms with notes about their life cycles, anatomical features, and ecological relationships. "You don't use the design programs?" she asked. Alex shook his head. "I find drawing helps me think better. I see connections more clearly this way." "And your teammates? Do they find your methods primitive?" "At first, maybe," Alex admitted. "But now Kiri has started making physical models of our organisms, and Plex says visualizing the whole ecosystem helps him understand the gas exchange cycles better. Even Vexlor admits that some problems are easier to solve when we step away from pure computation." Zilnara studied the human for a moment. "Your approach has influenced them, and they've influenced me," Alex replied. "I've learned so much about precision and measurement from Vexlor. Kiri's understanding of crystalline structures gave me ideas I never would have considered, and Plex's perspective on gas-based communication is fascinating." Professor Zilnara found herself reevaluating her assumptions once again. The exchange of ideas was going both ways, exactly as the interspecies educational exchange program had intended, though not in the way she had expected. Presentation day arrived, and the large lecture hall was filled with students and several guest professors who had come to observe the projects. Each team would have 30 minutes to present their ecosystem design and answer questions. The first 3 teams showed impressive technical work. One group created silicon-based organisms that could burrow deep underground during temperature shifts. Another designed floating plants that would migrate between hemispheres, following the optimal temperature zones. The third developed thick-shelled creatures that could seal themselves completely during extreme conditions. Professor Zilnara nodded with approval at each presentation. The students had applied their knowledge well and created viable solutions, using established xenobiological principles. When it was time for Alex's team to present, Vexlor began by explaining their overall approach. "We have designed an ecosystem based on transformation rather than resistance or avoidance," he said, his metallic voice precise and clear. Kiri continued, "Our primary species undergoes a complete metamorphosis as the temperature shifts, existing in 2 distinct forms optimized for each temperature extreme. The main display showed their design, a 6-legged creature that resembled a furry turtle in its cold weather form, but transformed into something like a thin-skinned winged lizard in its hot weather form." Plex explained the supporting species. They had designed small burrowing organisms that served as food sources, specialized plants that flowered in different seasons, and microscopic life that helped maintain soil chemistry. Then it was Alex's turn. Instead of focusing on technical details, he explained the interconnections. "The key to our ecosystem is not just the individual adaptations but how everything works together," he said. "Each species supports the others through the transformation periods. The timing of metamorphosis is staggered, ensuring that some part of the ecosystem is always active and functional." He showed a time-lapse simulation of their ecosystem responding to temperature changes over several cycles. The audience watched as organisms transformed, migrated, and adapted in a flowing pattern that maintained balance despite the extreme shifts. "Most importantly," Alex concluded, "our ecosystem isn't static. We designed the genetics to allow for continued evolution and adaptation. If conditions on Nexus 9 change over time, the species can adjust without outside intervention." When they finished, there was a moment of silence before the questions began. A senior professor from the ecology department spoke first. "Your approach is highly unusual. Have you tested the energy requirements for these metamorphic processes? Such transformations would require significant resources." Vexlor answered with precise calculations showing how their primary species stored energy in specialized cells during feeding periods to fuel the transformation. Another professor asked about genetic stability over multiple generations. Kiri explained their solution using redundant DNA strands that prevented mutation in critical transformation genes. The questions continued, each more technically challenging than the last. The team answered confidently, with each member addressing different aspects based on their expertise. Professor Zilnara observed silently until the end. Then she asked the question she had been saving. "Your design differs fundamentally from traditional approaches to extreme environment adaptation. What inspired this direction?" The team members looked at each other and then at Alex. "It was inspired by multiple sources," Alex said. "Earth butterflies suggested the metamorphosis concept. The gas exchange system was inspired by Jovian atmospheric cycles that Plex described. The temperature-sensing trigger mechanism came from studying Centaurian crystal responses to heat, and the precise timing of the transformation sequence was optimized using Syrian computational models that Vexlor developed." He paused and then added, "But I think what really made our approach different was that we didn't try to fight against the planet's natural cycles. Instead, we embraced them and designed life that works with these cycles rather than against them." After all teams had presented, the professors met to evaluate the projects. The students waited anxiously outside the lecture hall discussing their presentations and guessing which team might receive the highest marks. "The silicon-based ecosystem was most technically impressive," said a Centaurian student from another team. "Yes, but the floating plant migration system showed better energy efficiency," argued another. Vexlor stood slightly apart, running calculations as he always did when processing new information. Alex sat on a bench nearby, sketching idly on his tablet. Are you not concerned about our evaluation? Vexlor asked, noticing Alex's calm demeanor. Alex looked up. Of course I care, but worrying won't change the outcome. The professors will judge our work based on its merits. Your confidence is not logical given the unprecedented nature of our approach, Vexlor noted. Alex smiled. Sometimes the best ideas seem illogical at first. They only make sense in retrospect. Before Vexlor could respond, the doors opened and students began filing back into the lecture hall. Professor Zilnara stood at the front with the other evaluators. We have reviewed all projects carefully, she announced once everyone was seated. Each team demonstrated commendable knowledge and creativity. She activated the display screen, which showed the rankings. A murmur went through the room as students saw the results. Alex's team was at the top of the list. Team 4's metamorphic ecosystem design received the highest evaluation, Zilnara stated. The committee was particularly impressed by their integration of multiple biological systems and the dynamic balance achieved throughout temperature cycles. She continued. More importantly, their design was the only one that incorporated long-term evolutionary adaptability. While other teams created ecosystems that would survive in current conditions, Team 4's design would continue to thrive, even as planetary conditions change over centuries. Alex and his teammates exchanged surprised but pleased looks. Even Vexlor's normally stoic face showed lights pulsing in patterns of excitement. After the formal announcement, students gathered in small groups to discuss the results. Many came to congratulate Alex's team and ask questions about their design process. As the crowd thinned, Professor Zilnara approached Alex. A moment of your time, Human Rivera. Alex nodded and followed her to her office, wondering if there was some issue with their project that hadn't been mentioned publicly. Once inside, Zilnara closed the door and turned to face him. Her facial tentacles were completely still, a sign of serious concentration among Arcturians. I must confess, something, she said, her voice quieter than usual. When you first joined my class, I expected you to fail. Alex didn't seem surprised by this admission. I know, Professor. Most people expect humans to be behind the curve in advanced fields. It was not just that, Zilnara said. I deliberately made things more difficult for you. The questions I asked you were consistently more challenging than those I posed to other students. I noticed, Alex said simply. Yet you never complained or pointed this out. Alex shrugged slightly. Complaining wouldn't have helped me learn. And besides, I enjoyed the challenge. Zilnara's facial tentacles moved in what might have been the Arcturian equivalent of a smile. You have taught me something important, Human Rivera. Different does not mean inferior. Your cognitive approach, what you humans call intuitive thinking, has value that I failed to recognize. News of Team 4's innovative ecosystem design spread quickly through the Galactic Academy. Students from other departments came to view their simulations, and faculty members discussed the implications of their approach for various scientific fields. Professor Zilnara found herself fielding questions from colleagues about the human student who had helped develop such an unusual solution. In the final weeks of the term, Zilnara made a significant change to her teaching methods. Instead of calling on students to answer predetermined questions, she began presenting open-ended problems and encouraging group discussions. She noticed that this new approach brought out different strengths in her students. Those with neural implants still excelled at recalling facts and performing calculations, but others showed skills in identifying patterns or suggesting creative connections. For the first time in her teaching career, Zilnara found herself learning alongside her students rather than simply instructing them. One morning, she received a message from the Academy's Administrative Council requesting a meeting. This was unusual. Professors were generally left to manage their classes without interference unless there was a serious problem. When she arrived at the council chamber, she found 5 senior administrators waiting for her. The head of the council, a tall proximan named Director Valen, spoke first. Professor Zilnara, we have been monitoring your xenobiology class with great interest, particularly since the midterm project presentations. Zilnara's facial tentacles tensed slightly. May I ask why my class has received special attention? Director Valen's expression was unreadable. The Interspecies Educational Exchange Program is a new initiative with significant political implications. The inclusion of humans in advanced studies at the Academy was controversial. Many believed their unaugmented minds would be unable to keep pace with our educational standards. I shared that belief initially, Zilnara admitted. Yes, we are aware, said another council member, making Zilnara wonder just how closely they had been monitoring her class. However, the results of your midterm project suggest something unexpected. Director Valen continued. The human student not only kept pace but contributed a perspective that led to a genuinely innovative solution. This raises important questions about our educational philosophy. Zilnara found herself defending Alex and, by extension, humans in general. Human Rivera has demonstrated that different cognitive approaches can complement our own. While his species lacks our technological enhancements, they appear to excel at making unexpected connections between concepts. The council members exchanged glances. Then Director Valen smiled slightly. We agree, Professor. That is precisely why we have called you here. We would like you to develop a new course for next term, one that specifically explores different cognitive approaches across species. Your recent experience makes you uniquely qualified to lead this initiative. Zilnara was surprised but pleased. I would be honored. However, I would require assistance from someone who understands human cognition more deeply. We anticipated that, said Director Valen. The Earth delegation has agreed to send a cognitive specialist to work with you. Additionally, we would like to retain Human Rivera as a teaching assistant if he is willing. When Zilnara returned to her classroom that afternoon, her students noticed a change in her demeanor. Her lesson on genetic drift in isolated populations was more interactive than usual, with frequent pauses for students to share their thoughts. After class, she asked Alex to stay behind. Human Rivera, she said. The Academy Council has proposed a new course for next term focused on comparative cognitive approaches. They have suggested that you might serve as a teaching assistant. Alex looked surprised. Me? But I'm still a student. Yes, but you have demonstrated an ability to bridge different ways of thinking. You helped your teammates understand your approach, and you integrated their methods into your own work. This is exactly the skill we need to develop in our students. Alex considered the offer. I would need to consult with Earth's education department, but I would be interested. However, I have one condition. Zilnara's facial tentacles twitched with curiosity. What condition? That the course includes cognitive approaches from all represented species, not just humans and the dominant alliance members. Plex's gaseous thought patterns are fascinating, and Kiri's crystalline processing has unique advantages. Every species has something valuable to contribute. Zilnara felt a surge of respect for the human. That is precisely the point of the course. I will ensure it is structured accordingly. On the final day of the term, Professor Zilnara gave a closing lecture that differed dramatically from her usual technical summaries. She stood before the class and spoke in a more personal tone than she had ever used before. When I began teaching, at this academy 200 years ago, I believed that advancement in education meant moving toward more technological enhancement of biological minds. I saw unaugmented cognition as primitive and limited. She paused, looking around at her diverse students. The past term has shown me the error in this thinking. True advancement comes not from making all minds work the same way, but from understanding and valuing the different ways that minds can work. The Arcturian precision, the Sirian computational power, the Jovian multidimensional thinking, the Centaurian crystalline processing, and yes, the human intuitive connection-making, each offers unique advantages. Zilnara gestured toward Alex and his teammates. Team 4's ecosystem design succeeded not because one approach was superior, but because multiple approaches work together. This is the future of galactic science, not uniformity, but complementary diversity. After the lecture, students gathered in small groups discussing their plans for the next term. Many expressed interest in the new cognitive approaches course that had been announced. Alex stood with Vex Lore, Kiri, and Plex, his teammates who had become his friends. Will you stay at the academy? Kiri asked him, her crystalline form catching the light. Alex nodded. Yes. I've been asked to help with a new course and Earth's education department has approved, but I'll also be taking advanced studies. Our team should continue working together, Plex suggested, his containment suit emitting pleased blue bubbles. The metamorphic ecosystem was just the beginning. I have ideas for applying similar principles to atmosphere regulation on colony worlds. I have already begun calculations on potential applications, Vexilor added. His mechanical parts had been slightly modified. He had reduced the size of his neural processor and added sensory components that allowed him to perceive patterns more like organic beings did. Professor Zilnara observed them from across the room, feeling a sense of satisfaction. When the human had first entered her classroom, she had seen only what he lacked: the neural implants, the quantum processors, the technological enhancements that she had thought essential to advanced cognition. Now she saw what he had brought. Instead, a different way of thinking that complemented and enhanced the capabilities of his classmates. And in doing so, he had changed not just her classroom but potentially the future of education throughout the Galactic Alliance. As the term ended and students departed for their break, Zilnara returned to her office to begin planning the new course. On her desk lay Alex's original hand-drawn sketches for the metamorphic ecosystem, simple lines on paper that had led to a profound shift in thinking. She carefully placed them in a display case on her wall, a reminder that sometimes the most powerful ideas come from unexpected places, and that intelligence takes many forms across the vast diversity of life in the galaxy.